You know that feeling when you just want a bottle of water, but suddenly, uh, you feel like you're on a Broadway stage without a script.
Oh, absolutely. The lights are glaring. The person behind the counter is just staring at you.
Right, they are waiting, and your brain entirely forgets how to speak. Like, total blank.
It is a terrifying feeling.
It really is. And that feeling of, well, linguistic panic is exactly why today we are dissecting a very specific, fascinating artifact of global education.
We're looking at a British Council Learn English Teens lesson, right?
Exactly. It's an A1 elementary speaking skills lesson simply titled At the Shop. And we've got some great sources for this deep dive.
We do. We have the official transcript of a convenience store transaction between a customer and a shopkeeper.
Yeah, plus the mechanical gap fill exercises they use to test the learners. And this is my favorite part, a rich, multi-year archive of user comments from the students themselves.
The comment section is just a gold mine.
It really is. So our mission for you today is to uncover how this seemingly mundane 13-line dialogue serves as a universal gateway to the English language. And, what that vibrant comment section reveals about the shared human experience of learning. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Before we can understand the learners, we have to look closely at the foundational text they're studying.
We really do, because that text acts as the structural foundation for, well, everything else we're going to talk about today.
Right, so let's break down the exact dialogue. We have a character named Gemma, and she walks into a shop.
And the shopkeeper opens with a very standard, "Hi, can I help you?"
Classic. So Gemma asks for the price of a magazine. It's called Top Sounds.
Which the shopkeeper informs her is £1.99.
Right, and then Gemma says, okay, can I have the magazine and do you have a bottle of water?
And this is where it gets specific, because she doesn't just want any water. She asks, have you got cold ones?
Yes, she specifically wants a cold one. So the shopkeeper directs her to the fridge, Gemma throws in some sweets, and the total comes to £3.40.
She hands over the money, says, here you are, and gets her £1.60 in change.
And then she declines a plastic bag, saying, no, it's fine, thanks, and just exits.
What's fascinating here is the absolute ruthless efficiency of this text.
How do you mean?
Well, in just 13 lines, it flawlessly covers the entire arc of retail survival for a beginner learner. I mean, think about it.
Okay, yeah.
You've got greetings, pricing inquiries, locating items in a physical space, plus finalizing a purchase, and even declining an upsell at the end with the bag.
It perfectly mirrors the universal retail experience. I look at this and I immediately think of like a video game tutorial level.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Like when you start a new role-playing game, they place you in a safe, enclosed village. You walk up to a non-player character to practice buying a basic health potion.
Yes, the dialogue options are totally fixed.
Exactly. You physically cannot mess it up because the system is designed to teach you the mechanical controls before throwing you out into the unpredictable open world. Gemma is essentially running the tutorial level of a British convenience store.
That captures the structural intent perfectly. It isolates the variables so the user can focus purely on the mechanics of the exchange.
But let me push back on that a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
Is this conversation actually reflective of how native speakers talk in a busy shop? I mean, I go into corner stores all the time, and it is rarely this clean.
That's fair.
There's mumbling, someone's credit card chip isn't reading, the music is blaring in the background, the cashier is distracted. Calling this an arc of retail survival feels like a stretch when it's clearly an artificial, sanitized version of reality, just so A1 learners don't get overwhelmed.
I see why you'd look at it that way, but dismissing it as sanitized misses the entire pedagogical architecture of the lesson.
Okay, explain that.
The artificiality isn't a flaw. It's the mechanism of instruction. In language acquisition, there's a concept known as the affective filter.
The affective filter.
Right. It refers to the emotional and psychological barriers like anxiety, self-doubt, or just sheer panic that prevent learners from processing new input.
Oh, so that stage fright feeling we talked about earlier?
Exactly. If you throw a beginner into the chaotic reality of a London corner shop on day one, their affective filter spikes. Their brain literally goes into a defensive mode and blocks the acquisition of new linguistic data.
So it's like teaching someone to drive. You don't put a first-time driver onto a rainy 6-lane highway during rush hour.
Definitely not.
You put them in an empty parking lot. You remove the external noise, the traffic, the weather, the angry drivers so they can master the clutch and the brake. Once the muscle memory is there, then you introduce the highway.
There's a much sharper way to frame it. You isolate the mechanics. Gemma's script is the empty parking lot. It provides the essential scaffolding.
Because they need that foundation first.
Right. You have to master the predictable, clean script to build the baseline confidence necessary to handle the chaotic, real-world improvisations later.
Okay, so if the dialogue script is the empty parking lot, how do we actually force the learner to engage with the mechanics of the car? That naturally brings us to how this text is actively taught and tested.
Yes, because the source material doesn't just give the students the script to read. It actively breaks the script apart to force retention.
In the lesson materials, there's a specific gap-fill version of the transcript. It takes this perfectly clean dialogue and just punches structural holes in it.
It creates deliberate friction.
Right, so the key transactional phrases are reduced to missing letters. Instead of a clean sentence like, how much is this magazine? The learner is presented with H blank M blank.
Which forces them to work for it.
Exactly. Instead of, can I have the magazine, it becomes C blank, IH blank. And a crucial request, like, do you have a bottle of water, is stripped down to D blank, UH blank.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what the lesson designers are doing here is highly strategic.
How so?
They are forcing the listener to move from passive reading into active structural recall, but pay close attention to what they are actually removing from the text.
Oh, I see what you mean. They aren't blanking out the nouns.
Exactly. They leave words like magazine, water, and sweets entirely intact.
They're targeting the connective tissue, the little helper verbs and the question words.
They are targeting the syntactic glue of the English language. Things like, how much, can I, do you have?
Have you got?
Yes. These auxiliary verbs and question structures are notoriously difficult for beginners. And the reason is that they rarely map one-to-one with a learner's native language.
That makes sense.
In many languages, you do not use an empty helper verb like do to ask a question. You just state the subject and verb, and you raise the pitch of your voice at the end of the sentence.
But English demands this complex, multi-word structural framing just to ask for a drink.
Right. So forcing the brain to manually fill in the missing letters for D blank UH physically builds the neural pathways for English sentence structure.
But let's pause and look at how the human brain actually responds to that imposed friction, because the user comments reveal a massive disconnect here. The lesson designers are desperately trying to force these students to memorize the complex helper verbs. But when you look at the feedback, the learners completely bypass the core grammar and fixate on the most unexpected details.
The priorities of the learner and the priorities of the teacher are rarely aligned.
So true. There's a user named Red Tyrannosaur 999, great name, by the way, who left a comment back in April 2021. They bypassed all the grammar completely and admitted, I didn't learn a sentence, but the word fridge.
Just the word fridge.
Just fridge. And then another user, CFEDV, commented a few days later saying, I didn't learn any phrase, but I learned a new word, customer.
Wow.
I mean, the whole point of the gap fill was to teach them, have you got? And they walked away proud of the word fridge. Why does the brain latch onto a random concrete noun so much easier than the actual grammatical structures they're supposed to be memorizing?
It comes down to the mechanics of working memory and cognitive visualization.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, for a beginner, abstract grammatical concepts like auxiliary verbs are effectively invisible. You cannot draw a picture of the word do or the word have in this context.
It's a good point. They're just functional.
They're purely functional operators. But a fridge is a massive, tangible anchor. You can visualize it. It hums, it's cold, it contains the water Gemma is asking for.
And a customer is a physical person standing in the video.
Exactly. Concrete nouns adhere to our memory much faster because the brain can instantly attach sensory data to them. Grammar is just the invisible string holding those nouns together, and that string requires immense, repetitive cognitive load to visualize.
So the brain is actively seeking out survival vocabulary. It wants the object, not the syntax.
And we really shouldn't view that as a failure of the lesson. For an A1 learner, acquiring any anchor vocabulary is a victory in communication.
Right, because if you have the noun, you have a fighting chance.
Absolutely. If that user goes to a shop in London, points at a beverage cooler and simply says fridge, the shopkeeper will understand what they want. The communication is successful.
Even without the grammar.
Yes. The structural grammar, the ability to say, could you point me toward the fridge, please, will eventually form around that concrete anchor noun.
Which means the gap fill is just one small mechanical engine trying to force these abstract rules into a learner's brain. But how does a human being actually cope with the isolation and the cognitive friction of that process?
That is the million-dollar question.
And that naturally brings us to the digital footprint of this lesson. Beneath the sterile transcript and the mechanical tests, there is a vibrant, chaotic, and deeply revealing comments section.
The comment section really transforms this from a static text into an asynchronous global classroom.
It's amazing. The archive spans from the end of 2020 all the way to March 2026. Thousands of learners, leaving a record of their struggles and their victories.
Like a time capsule.
It is. And instead of just looking at what they said, if we group these comments by their psychological function, we start to see how asynchronous digital learning actually operates.
Oh, definitely. You see a lot of comments grappling directly with cognitive load.
Yeah, like user Nuko praising it as the perfect lesson for A1 skills. But then there's a user named Izia who admits the dialogue is fast and twisting for me to follow, but it's okay, and I enjoy it very much.
Fast and twisting is such a precise way to describe the neurological sensation of processing a new language.
It really is.
Because, to a fluent speaker, Gemma's dialogue is painfully slow and deliberate. But to a learner, the processing speed required to decode the sounds, translate them into their native language, formulate a response, and translate that response back into English.
It's exhausting.
It feels like a high-speed pursuit. Izia's comment is a public acknowledgement of that cognitive fatigue.
But then you have comments that seem to have nothing to do with the lesson at all, but they're functioning as a kind of identity formation.
Oh, I know exactly which one you're going to mention.
My absolute favorite is from Jorge Gil. In the middle of this thread about buying magazines and water, Jorge uses the space to announce himself to the world.
It's so wholesome.
He writes, "Jello, I am Jorge Gil, and I am Hispanese. I like paella and tortilla potato." He completely ignored the convenience store prompt.
He did, but he didn't ignore the core purpose of language, which is self-expression.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
When you're learning a new language, you are often reduced to an infantile state of expression. You have complex adult thoughts, but you only have the vocabulary of a toddler to express them.
That disparity has to be incredibly frustrating.
It's frustrating and dehumanizing. Jorge's comment is a mechanism for reclaiming his identity. By stating his nationality and his favorite cultural foods, he's using his limited A1 vocabulary to say, I am a complex human being with a culture and a history, even if my English is basic.
It's a way of establishing selfhood in a foreign linguistic space.
Exactly.
That makes the comment section so much more than just a place to practice vocabulary. But then you also see users who use the space for intense peer-to-peer pedagogical reinforcement.
Right, the ones who basically become assistant teachers.
Yes, like this user named Huangvu, who left a highly detailed multi-sentence breakdown mapping out exactly which phrases they would use if they were the customer versus which phrases they would use if they were the shopkeeper.
They basically wrote a mini thesis on the power dynamics of the interaction.
They really did.
This raises an important question about the social mechanisms of digital learning. What Huangvu is doing is leveraging the protege effect.
The protege effect.
Yes. Psychological studies consistently show that one of the most effective ways to cement your own learning is to teach the material or map it out for someone else.
Oh, right. Because you have to understand it deeply to explain it.
Precisely. By organizing the phrases and publicly categorizing them for the benefit of the other commenters, Huangvu is actively reconstructing the grammar in their own head. The comment section isn't just an afterthought. It's a vital tool for pedagogical reinforcement.
But let me ask you this. Do you think these public comment sections actually improve a student's language retention? I mean, you have people typing out phrases, analyzing roles, stating their favorite foods. Is this actually helping them learn English? Or is this just the digital equivalent of a school desk where everyone carves their name to shout, "I was here," into the void?
It undeniably improves retention, and primarily because it alters the emotional state of the learner.
Going back to the affective filter.
Exactly. We discussed that spike in anxiety that blocks learning. Language learning is inherently isolating and vulnerable. You are constantly making mistakes and sounding foolish.
It takes a lot of ego death.
It does. So when a user scrolls down and sees hundreds of other people from dozens of different countries struggling with the exact same 13 lines of text, it immediately normalizes the difficulty.
The anxiety drops.
Right. You realize you aren't uniquely failing. You are simply participating in a shared universal struggle. Writing a comment shifts the learner from being an isolated consumer of content into an active participant in a supportive community.
And you can even see that support structure extending to the technical side of the platform.
Yes, the moderators are fantastic.
The invisible infrastructure keeping this classroom running is fascinating. In the archive from 2024, a user named Booban2076 posts in a slight panic, simply asking, "Where is the video?"
A very relatable panic.
Right. And just 4 days later, Tina Coordinator from the Learn English Teens team steps in. She doesn't just drop a link, she helps troubleshoot. She asks if they are using Chrome, Internet Explorer, Safari.
She checks if other media players are working.
Yeah. It's a mundane moment of tech support, but it highlights the safety net beneath the learners.
It provides proof of presence.
Yeah.
When you are shouting into the void of the internet, trying to master a skill to connect with other people, receiving a response from a human coordinator is deeply validating.
Because it shows someone is actually listening.
Exactly. It reassures the learner that the infrastructure of their education is being actively maintained, which in turn encourages them to keep engaging with the material.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of ground today by looking at one incredibly short, deceptively simple piece of text.
We really have.
We deconstructed the surgical precision of an A1 dialogue about buying a magazine and cold water. We examined the mechanical friction of gap fill tests and why the human brain desperately clings to concrete anchors like the word fridge while rejecting invisible grammar.
And we explored how a digital comments section functions as a complex mechanism for cognitive relief, identity formation, and peer reinforcement.
It reminds us that behind every mechanical language exercise is a human being trying to navigate the friction of expression.
It really does. Even for those of us who use this language effortlessly every day, breaking down these basic building blocks, exposing the immense, invisible architecture of our daily interactions.
It's so true. We don't think about the cognitive load of spatial directions or the syntactic strangeness of our helper verbs.
But looking at it through the lens of a beginner reminds us of the sheer complexity of what we are doing and the universal human desire to simply be understood by the person across the counter.
And understanding that complexity should give us a profound sense of patience, both for ourselves when we are learning and for others when they're trying to communicate with us.
Absolutely.
Which brings me to a final thought for you to mull over. We established early on that this transcript is a controlled environment.
The empty parking lot.
Right. It is the empty parking lot where you learn the pedals before hitting the highway. But eventually, Jorge and Isa and Red Tyrannosaur 999 are going to have to drive in traffic.
They are.
When they eventually step into a chaotic, real-world shop in London or New York, the person behind the counter is almost certainly not going to follow the Gemma script perfectly.
No, they might be speaking to a coworker, or they might use slang the learner hasn't studied.
Or the credit card machine might crash. So it makes you wonder, is the true test of linguistic fluency actually how well you can memorize and deploy the provided script? Or is fluency defined entirely by your ability to improvise in the exact moment the other person goes completely off script?
That's a great question.
Something to think about the next time you ask a stranger for a cold bottle of water.